Nestled deep in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains, through valleys shaped by eons of wind and rain, there lived a young boy named Eli Turner. He was 12 years old enough to know hardship, young enough to believe in miracles. Eli's entire world centered around a weathered cabin perched halfway up Blackberry Ridge, where the forest pressed close and the sunrise painted the sky with gold. He grew up among the pines and oaks, under the watchful eye of his father, John Turner, a quiet carpenter with hands seasoned by years of honest labor and eyes that held both kindness and a shadow of sadness. Every morning, Eli woke before the sun, hearing the first birds thread their songs through the mist. He'd slip on his muddy boots, sling a battered backpack over his shoulder, and tiptoe down the porch steps, careful not to creak the loose board that always gave away his escape. Some mornings were reserved for hauling buckets from the old well, others for checking the garden that clung stubbornly to life on a patch of rocky ground. But what Eli cherished most were the moments he could slip away down the winding path, beyond the brook and through the birch stand, to visit Mrs. Henrietta Williams, his father's oldest neighbor. Mrs. Williams lived alone in a crooked farmhouse, almost swallowed by blackberry brambles and wild roses. Rumor in the valley said she was more thorn than blossom, short with her words, sharp with her eyes, but Eli knew better. She'd lost her husband decades ago to a mining accident that stole half the joy from her laughter. Their children moved away, and as the years passed, visitors became rare. Eli saw through the bark. He saw the tired lines in her face soften every time she recounted stories of old music drifting through heated summer nights or the scent of honeysuckle wafting into her kitchen. Eli made it his mission to visit her with gifts, a basket of wild strawberries, his best joke, or simply a quiet hour spent listening. On this October day, the threat of a mighty storm loomed. Eli's father was already busy, moving everything loose inside the barn and strapping tarps across the woodpile. The radio in the kitchen, a crackling old thing that only played gospel and baseball, warned that a historic event was barreling toward the valley, promising winds fierce enough to topple old trees and rains heavy as river water. For Eli, storms carried both dread and excitement, the thrill of lightning, the drum of rain, and above all, the sinking fear for those whose roofs were weaker than their wills. That night, as the wind began to shake the cabin walls, Eli lay awake, listening to the dance of branches against his window. The storm arrived with a roar, lightning spidering across the sky, thunder shaking even the deepest roots. Eli worried about Mrs. Williams up the ridge, knew her house was older than memory, patched in places with prayers and stubbornness. Sometime after midnight, he thought he heard a crack echo across the holler, a sound too sharp for thunder, too final to be ignored. Maybe it was wishful thinking or something deeper, but Eli felt then and there that Mrs. Williams needed him. At first light, he asked his father if he could go check on her. John Turner hesitated, remembering storms that took roofs and lives alike, but in Eli's eyes he saw a resolve he respected. "Take care, son, and don't do anything foolish," he said, pressing a raincoat and a flashlight into Eli's hands. Eli slung a hammer into his bag, packed sandwiches, and set off up the slick path, heart pounding, boots filling with cold mud. The climb was tougher than usual. Trees had fallen, paths flooded, and the roar of the creek was louder than Eli had ever heard. He fought the urge to turn back, driven by the image of Mrs. Williams alone in her kitchen, waiting for someone who'd never come. When finally he reached her house, a scene of devastation met him. A third of the roof was gone, walls soaked through, the porch steps half swallowed by slush and branches. Eli called her name. No answer. He called again. At last, she appeared in the doorway, face pale and eyes huge with worry. Eli rushed inside, dodging the drip-drip of rain leaking through the rafters. "Mrs. Williams, are you all right?" he asked, voice trembling. She managed a brittle laugh. "Sure, honey, just a little water. This old place always leaks when it pours. Charlie used to say our house was more sieve than shelter." Eli checked her over, helped her sit by the stove, and got to work. He dragged a battered ladder from the shed, braved the pelting rain, and scrambled up to assess the damage. Shingles lay like broken teeth across the yard. The tar paper beneath flapped in the wind, and several beams had split under the storm's weight. Eli worked with the quiet confidence his father had taught him, hands steady as he patched the biggest gap with tarp and planks, hammering nails with the determination of someone who refused to let fear win. Hours passed. Mrs. Williams brought him sweet tea, the steam clouding her glasses, and together they laughed about the time she chased a bear out of her garden with nothing but a broom and a bucket. Inside again, Eli noticed puddles spreading across the floor, threatening furniture and old keepsakes. He redirected buckets, moved rugs, and took stock. Mrs. Williams insisted she was fine, but Eli knew her frail cough was made worse by the damp. As they worked, she shared more stories: how she met Charlie at a summer dance, how she learned to read by lamplight after chores were done, how the valley used to echo with fiddle tunes every Saturday night. But as Eli shifted a board near the stove, something caught his eye. A small metal box wedged between the beams, almost invisible in the gloom. "Did you know this was here?" he asked. Mrs. Williams squinted. Her breath caught. "Charlie, he hid things all over for me. Said every storm brought a new treasure." Eli gently pried the box free and handed it to her. Inside, beneath yellowed letters and a faded photograph, was a deed, handwritten, official, almost forgotten. It confirmed that the house wasn't just hers, but sat atop several acres of land that years before was believed lost to taxes or sold off in family disputes. Mrs. Williams stared at the paper, tears glistening. "I always thought the land behind the orchard was gone." Eli helped her open the letters. Some were from Charlie, declaring his love, promising to build a future among the hills. Others were news clippings and notes from neighbors, patchwork histories of the valley, pieces of a community sewn together by memory and need. Eli felt something shift inside. Storms weren't just about rain and wind. They unearthed what mattered most. By late afternoon, Eli's father arrived, worried sick. Together they stabilized the porch, cleared the debris, and shored up the weak walls. Word spread quickly. That evening, neighbors arrived, bringing tools, casseroles, and old stories. The sadness and isolation that haunted Mrs. Williams faded with each kind word, each shared meal. Eli watched as the house, once a fortress of loneliness, filled with laughter and light. As the town helped rebuild, more discoveries followed. Behind the cellar wall, Eli and a group of kids found a second locked box, its key cleverly hidden under a loose brick. Inside were more deeds, savings bonds untouched for 30 years, and a journal, Mrs. Williams's diary, chronicling daily joys and heartbreaks, the growth of her children, and the loss that never fully faded. In one entry she wrote, "A storm always brings fear, but sometimes it brings the only soul brave enough to knock." The repairs became a celebration. Every day Eli returned to help, carrying tools, buckets, and jokes. He found himself drawn to the backyard, where wildflowers grew thick and oak trees spread their ancient arms. It was there, in the shadow of the old orchard, that he met strangers, descendants of valley families come for news, for comfort, or in search of lost roots. Eli listened, learning about the valley's history, and discovered he was linked to these stories in ways he couldn't have imagined. The days that followed shaped Eli's future. Mrs. Williams became more than a neighbor, more than a recipient of kindness. She became a grandmother in spirit, sharing recipes, laughter, and secrets. Eli's father watched in pride as his son grew, not taller but deeper, his quiet resolve earning respect far beyond his years. With the help of the entire valley, the roof was rebuilt, the walls saved, and the land reclaimed for Mrs. Williams. In gratitude, she hosted a feast, a Saturday picnic that became the talk of the mountains. As dusk settled, Eli looked around, the hills bathed in the pink glow of evening, children chasing fireflies, old men playing banjo, and Mrs. Williams at the heart of it all, her face radiant with belonging. She gave Eli a book, her husband's old poetry journal, its pages filled with hope and wonder. "You saved me, Eli," she said, voice trembling, "and you reminded this town what it means to be family." But the story wasn't done. 1 week later, Eli uncovered a map tucked behind the beams he'd repaired. It revealed hidden trails through the valley, old campsites, and a spot marked CW's last gift. Eli and Mrs. Williams traced the path on a crisp autumn morning, descending into a hollow where a spring burst from the rocks. Clear, cold water that tasted like promise. Beside the spring, buried under moss and stone, lay a small wooden chest. Inside, photographs, a hand-carved music box, and a letter from Charlie. In it he wrote, "If you read this, the worst has passed. Remember, storms shape the mountains, but love shapes the soul." The valley changed forever. The spring became a gathering place, a symbol of hope, renewal, and the miracles that storms sometimes leave behind. Eli was hailed a hero, but he refused the title, insisting that anyone could be brave if they listened for the call. Mrs. Williams grew stronger, her laughter restored. Her house became the heart of the valley, open to old friends and new. Years went by. Eli, grown tall and wise, kept the valley's story alive. Whenever storms came, he'd knock on every neighbor's door, share food and comfort, and remind them that no one faced the wind alone. Mrs. Williams passed on, peaceful, her legacy living in each person she'd touched. The map, the journal, and the spring remained, waiting to welcome the next generation of storm bravers. As the years drifted by, the story of that storm, the night a boy's courage changed everything, became the fabric of valley legend. Eli, once a scrappy 12-year-old with hands stained by saffron clay and heart wide open to sorrow and hope alike, matured with each season, molded by the lessons of hardship and generosity. The valley itself seemed to breathe differently after that autumn. Where once folks cared only for their patch of earth, a new rhythm pulsed: communal barn raisings, shared harvests, impromptu gatherings under lantern-lit trees. Children grew up reciting tales of Mrs. Williams's treasure box, the lost deeds, the magic of finding spring water in the belly of the ridge. For Eli, Mrs. Williams remained a constant presence through his coming-of-age years. She became his tutor, a surrogate grandmother who taught him the names of wildflowers, how to mend a quilt with steady hands, how to listen, not merely hear, but truly listen, when adults stopped to share stories that threaded the past to the present. Each birthday, Henrietta would bake Eli a pie from scratch, always cherry, dusted with sugar and left to cool on the windowsill. As he grew stronger, he, in turn, became her protector, chopping wood for her stove, checking the rafters for leaks, clearing snow from her porch with the same meticulous care he once reserved for her battered roof. Community flourished in unlikely places. The playground, built on Mrs. Williams' donated land, became a sanctuary, not only for rowdy kids but also for marriages needing mending, and elders longing for the music of laughter. Every year, on the anniversary of the storm, soon called Homecoming Day in honor of what was saved, the valley folk convened for a day-long festival. Grills blazed with corn and venison, neighbors staged pie-eating contests, musicians filled the night with bluegrass. At dusk, lanterns floated down the creek in remembrance of those lost and in hope for those yet to come. Eli's reputation as a helper grew beyond the valley. When the river flooded town one grim February, it was Eli who organized the sandbagging brigade, carrying waterlogged pets to the elementary school-turned-shelter. When a traveling preacher's child fell ill, Eli's steady hand ferried grandfather's home remedies and hopeful words from porch to porch until the boy recovered. People began coming to him for advice, for comfort, for a nudge back onto the right path. Never once did he raise his voice in anger or demand recognition. His presence was soft as dawn, reassuring as bread baking on Sunday morning. Mrs. Williams, her hair now pure silver, still hosted Sunday suppers for anyone in need. Lonely widowers, shy newcomers, the local vet struggling with memories of faraway wars. Eli was always there, sometimes quiet at the end of the table, sometimes humming tunes with the children, always ready with a listening ear for secrets and dreams. Between bites of cornbread and sips of buttermilk, stories spilled like blessings, tales of the first railroad. The time lightning struck the steeple, but nobody got hurt. Prank wars between generations of Turners and Jenkinses. When Eli turned 16, Mrs. Williams entrusted him with Charlie's old toolbox, a treasure trove of chisels, hammers, and hand-forged nails, each mellowed with use. "Tools are like people," she told him one quiet afternoon. "If you keep 'em sharp and treat 'em with respect, they'll build you a good life." That winter, Eli joined the local carpenters on projects up and down the county, repairing fences for the elderly, restoring weathered barns, even building cradles for newborns. His hands became calloused and sure, capable of shaping more than wood. He became, in the words of those who knew him, the kind of man who carried light into dark places. But even as the years ticked forward, the heart of everything remained Mrs. Williams's little house and the secret spring they'd found together. Every so often, Eli would return alone, sitting on the cool stones, remembering the letter from Charlie that still lived in his breast pocket. When he felt lost, after the heartbreak of his first love, or when the valley was rocked by storms that tore homes from their foundations, he came to the spring, dipped his hands in the water, and remembered, storms shape the mountains. Love shapes the soul. When Mrs. Williams's health began to fade, the valley responded as one. Neighbors brought casseroles and company daily. Folks volunteered to help clean her house, read to her as her eyesight dwindled, or simply sit and talk so she would never be alone. Eli came every morning before dawn, first to do chores, then simply to hold her hand and keep her company as the mountain's chill seeped through her bones. On the final day of spring, with dogwoods blooming and sunlight dappling her windows, Mrs. Williams rested in her favorite rocking chair. Eli sat on the porch with her, both silent, watching a clutch of bluebirds flutter in the honeysuckle. She squeezed his hand with what strength she had left, her voice thin as gossamer. "You took care of me, Eli. You took care of everyone. Promise you'll keep looking after this ridge even after I've gone." Eli promised, his heart heavy and grateful all at once. That evening, Mrs. Williams slipped away, her breaths turning soft and slow, a gentle messenger from one world into the next. The funeral filled the hillsides. People who hadn't spoken in years stood shoulder to shoulder, crying and laughing and swapping memories that stitched the old wounds closed. Eli spoke, his voice steady. "Storms will come again. We can't keep them away, but we can decide every day to be the ones who show up after, the ones who rebuild, who remember, who care." Mrs. Williams's will was unexpected. She left her house to the community as a gathering hall, her land to the children for playing and planting, and her letters and journals to Eli. He spent months cataloging the history within, tracking down relatives, restoring land boundaries, helping the local historical society preserve her memory for every generation. As time carried Eli into adulthood, the legend of that storm and its treasures only grew. Children memorized his tale. Acts of kindness multiplied. Lost hikers returned safe. Strangers offered dinner. Wedding rings found after years in the creek gravel. The Homecoming Day festival grew so large it required extra benches and food trucks, musicians coming in from as far as Nashville, just for the honor of singing Mrs. Williams's song at sunset. Decades later, Eli, now Mr. Turner to some, Pa to his children, the boy who saved the mountain to all, still made his way up the winding path to the spring. He would stoop, loosen his knees and sip the cold, clear water with the same awe as when he was 12. Sometimes he brought a child or grandchild. Sometimes he came alone, just to thank the mountain, the storm, and the love that had reshaped not just his life, but a whole community's sense of home. What Henrietta Williams and Eli Turner discovered wasn't just a chest of documents, but the truth that storms, whether made of wind, water, or the loneliness that creeps in at dusk, break more than houses. They break boundaries. They teach us who we are and what we owe to each other. And somewhere in every ravaged attic, every leaky roof, and in every buried box, there's always something waiting to be found, if only we're brave enough to go looking. If you're still here, if you let this story settle in your chest a moment, take it with you. Ask about your own neighbors, old and new. Show up after the rain. Be the hand that knocks, the roof patcher, the secret finder, the one who keeps memories alive. And when the wind starts howling round your own home, remember, somewhere someone is hoping you'll answer the door. On the anniversary of the Great Storm, as the valley prepared its annual homecoming celebration, Eli stood by the old community hall that had once been Mrs. Williams's living room. Fresh coats of paint brightened the once shabby siding, and new windows glistened where old glass had rattled in the wind. Every detail held a memory: the porch swing where she'd confided her stories, the stoop where Eli first stood with a soggy sandwich and a heart full of purpose. The original mailbox remained, its flag bent, inscribed now with hundreds of names: neighbors, guests, wandering strangers who'd left behind a note or a hope or a wish. Families set up tables under poplar trees draped with lanterns. Kids ran through fields that had once been thickets of bramble, their laughter ringing out like a miniature echo of freedom. At noon, as tradition demanded, someone placed a battered shoebox in the center of the gathering. Inside lay slips of paper scrawled with gratitude or remembrance. "Thank you for finding my home after the flood," read one. "You helped me through the year my husband left," read another. The act of writing these notes, however simple, had grown into a ceremony cultivated by hands and hearts old and new. Eli felt the familiar ache, the bittersweet sense of loss mixed with pride. Each year he'd listen as people retold the legend of the boy and the widow, sometimes with embellishments that made him chuckle. I heard he swam across a river to get there. No, he flew with the eagles. He never corrected the tales, content to let magic settle where it would. He knew the real miracle hadn't been his courage alone. It was what happened afterward, the way kindness multiplied itself, becoming invisible threads pulling everyone closer together. After the feast, as dusk painted the sky purple, families drifted toward the spring in the hollow. Lanterns flashed and winked, casting long shadows on the waters. Eli stood by the edge, his oldest granddaughter tugging at his sleeve, and he retold the story. The day he'd found the hidden chest, the promise Charlie put within those lines, and the way a broken roof had opened up a whole mountain's worth of love. Sometimes a newcomer would ask, "Is that all true?" Eli would grin and reply, "True enough to save a life, true enough to build a home. What else matters?" The ceremony at the spring was always the same. Those gathered would stand in silence, watching the lanterns float, remembering storms old and storms yet to come. Some years they sang, other years they stood still, letting the chill wind remind them how precious it was to be together, sheltered and safe. Eli's oldest friends would say things like, "It's funny how a storm can make good things grow," and the children would drop notes written to lost pets, absent loved ones, or dreams barely whispered. One year, a boy not much older than Eli had been during that first storm asked him, "How do you know what to do when it gets hard, when nobody else seems brave?" Eli thought a moment, kneeling down so their eyes were level. "You don't have to be certain. Just show up where you're needed. Let your feet carry you farther than your fear. Pay attention to what folks hide away. When in doubt, ask yourself what you'd want someone to do if you were them." The boy nodded, lips pursed in serious concentration, and to Eli's delight, showed up 2 days later, boots muddy, hair wild, carrying bread for an old neighbor 3 doors down who'd lost power. The valley had learned that the best kind of heroism was ordinary: steady hands, warm food, willingness to listen. Mrs. Williams's journals became the cornerstones of the local school's history curriculum. Kids wrote essays about the importance of community, mapped the changes the mountain had undergone since the time of her ancestors, and staged plays in the community hall, dramatizing the stormy night. High school seniors tasked with a project called Living Roots shadowed Eli as he made repairs, listened to the thunder song of the creek, and tried their hands at patching roofs and planting heirloom beans. Eli never took credit. He pointed to Mrs. Williams, to his parents, and to those who'd shown him mercy and patience on his worst days. Sometimes, after all the hustle of spring and summer, he'd retreat to the hollow alone, or with a trusted friend. Sitting by the spring, feet in cool water, he'd reflect on the quiet miracles that made up the ordinary days of the valley. Rescued barn cats, bread shared with new arrivals, laughter carrying over fences at sunset. Storms never stopped coming. Some rattled windows, some split the oldest trees, some arrived as heartbreak or the slow taking of old age. For every storm, Eli showed up with tools, food, and the certainty that nothing bad lasted forever, not if a neighbor was there to listen, to sit, to patch, to heal. Mrs. Williams's legacy flourished. The orchard behind her house yielded fruit that was split among every family: pears for pies, apples for jam, peaches for evening snacks. The garden grew wild with sunflowers and pumpkins, somehow thriving even through years of drought, a living symbol of her stubborn hope. Young people fell in love under the poplars. Elders wept tears of gratitude at the sight of children playing where once only bramble grew. By late summer, when the valley was soaked in green and the air was thick with the promise of storms to come, Eli found himself more contemplative than ever. He reread Charlie's letter at the spring, thinking about all it had given him. The words didn't change, but their meaning deepened. If you read this, the worst has passed. Remember, storms shape the mountains, but love shapes the soul. Eli held those words close, passing them on whenever the chance arose, weaving them into the valley's story. Years passed, whole decades sometimes, without a single devastating storm. Children grew up, moved away, and found their own neighborhoods to mend. Some came back after hardship, with stories of distant places, new lessons, and a deep gratitude for what Eli and Mrs. Williams had given them. The sense that the world was, at its best, a web of hands holding each other steady. Eli aged the way mountain folks do. Slowly at first, then all at once. His hair turned white, his back bent, and his voice grew thin but retained its warmth. Every day, someone knocked at his door to check on him. Young people he'd helped raise, old neighbors whose homes he'd repaired a dozen times over. He sat on his porch, shelling peas or whittling bits of wood, and was always ready to welcome anyone needing company. On the day Eli passed, the whole valley gathered. Bells rang out from the church, lanterns floated downstream, and in every house, pie was shared, and stories about the boy who showed up filled the air. Mrs. Williams's hall was packed tight with neighbors and friends from 3 counties. At the spring, the community carved a stone in Eli's memory. Storms will come. Let love be your inheritance. Every child in the valley knew that if you were lucky, you had someone like Eli, and if you were brave, you could be someone like him too. People often came from miles away to hear the story, to see the house with patched roof and strong porch, to stand by the spring and let cold water run over their hands. It was not a tale of grand adventure, but one of enduring kindness, forgiveness, and the truth that what matters most is how you care for the people around you. Every autumn, when the air cooled and leaves began to turn, the valley lit lanterns and retold the legend, each person adding a detail, a kindness repaid, a memory cherished, a lesson learned in the wake of hardship. And so, the chain of help, hope, and belonging grew longer, strong enough to withstand any storm. If on a rainy night someone knocked at your door, wet, tired, a little scared, remember Eli, remember Mrs. Williams, and let your heart carry you forward. For storms shape the world, but human kindness will always shape the course of our lives.